welcome to the industry analysis based on the real world industry with a Astranti for the February 2020 MCS on Trevel Records. So what we're going to do here first of all is just explain a little bit of how to use this analysis. So we've got several different chapters here that are going to go through different aspects of the industry, ranging from just an introduction through to the customers and marketing, process and distribution, stakeholders, competitors, and then some key issues, trends, and examples. So, with that said, how do we actually utilize this analysis? Well, the first thing is that we are utilizing it from a point of view that we are looking at previous examiners' comments, and as you probably know very well, this is the first case study following the new syllabus update, so there's definitely some aspect of slightly unknown features, but we know from our liaisons with CIMA and also just our past experience that this is typically going to be where you pick up some of that extra contextual knowledge that really helps you form a good answer, because sometimes the theory alone will lead you to answers that don't really make too much sense sometimes. So this is where the industry analysis comes in. And just as a quick quote, we see that in most questions it was hoped that candidates would be able to answer using industry knowledge and knowledge of the company. So that's what they've said beforehand. We know that it's very useful for picking up marks, and that is basically the reason for this analysis, to do all the work for you, to condense it down into one simple document. Though it is quite large, of course. Now, we have to link this to our role. Now, we did discuss this in the previous analysis videos briefly, but we'll do so again here. We are a financial manager at Trevel's head office, so we are part of the parent company if there are subsidiaries. We haven't really been clarified on that at any point throughout the pre-scene. And our primary responsibilities are with management accounting. Now, sometimes we report directly to the finance director on some cases, but in this case, we've got a very standardized linear chain of command. We're reporting to our SFM, the senior financial manager, and then we are reporting to them. They are then reporting, to the director. So it's a very quintessential management accounting role, and that means we're going to be focusing a lot more on budgetary aspects, the implementation of strategy, rather than changing it. So in that sense, we're going to have a very, very sort of narrow box, less strategic elements, because sometimes the management level can extend into the strategic bracket as well. So with that said, now let's get stuck into the industry. And one last thing before actually I move on. This is not a replacement. This video will not replace reading the document for you. This is just a verbal guide, a sort of brief overview, if you will, of a very large document. And if I went through, line by line for the entire document, it would be an absolutely enormous file that you wouldn't really want to listen to in one bite. So we're going to go through with a broad brush overview of what the industry analysis looks like. Now, the history is that music has clearly been very, very popular as just an overall feature of our culture, especially in the Western world, but across all aspects, especially the further back you go, the more broad and sort of nuanced it is in different regions of the world. But in particular, you see the birth of the live performance since essentially the dawn of society. We've always had an aspect of social entertainment with live performing arts as a basis for trading and sort of, getting compensation for the entertainment. However, it wasn't until 1877 where Thomas Edison invented the phonograph, which essentially allows the recording of sounds. And from here, we see the recorded music industry has that focus. There is now the musicians themselves being the important part to the overall music, rather than the composer, because the composer was typically the forefront of live performing arts prior to 1877, and now it matters much more from this point onwards of who's actually delivering the music, the musician themselves, rather than exactly who wrote the piece. For example, in modern culture, pick any song in pop culture, you maybe struggle to identify if a certain song was written by the artist or not, because often the songwriters can be these ghost writers that will write for popular artists, and it's sort of under the radar. They get their royalties, they're happy, the musician gets a great song to record, they get their money, they're happy, etc. So we see the musician become the forefront of recorded music, and this is quite key to the industry overall, because you'll see, if you have checked out the analysis videos, we see that negotiation and royalty payments come up a lot throughout, especially in regards to the musicians. Now, what happened from this point? Well, there's about 70 years or so before any sort of immense updates happen, and just after the World War, somebody recorded the first sound-on-sound sort of multi-track recording. So essentially, this is where you can have two separate sounds being played alongside one another. If you've ever seen a sort of sound or video editing platform on your computer, you'll see that there's different tracks and you can have different sounds separated and stuff like that. This is the very first case where there's two sounds going on at the same time, and this is where you see recorded music sort of jump forwards into really massive pop culture here. And this is where you get record labels, because this aspect of not only recorded music, but also the ability to add extra value. For example, the multi-track recording allows you to have sound technicians and other artists or musicians involved in like a backing track with the lyrics alongside the main melody, for example. So therefore, record labels suddenly have not only this musician to promote and sort of raise the image of with traditional marketing at this time, but also they can add value in terms of the musical aspects as well with sound technicians and stuff like that. So that's the record labels becoming born essentially, and then we see technological growth and the sort of height of the recorded music industry. You'll see that CDs sort of were at the peak, and you have the vinyl which carried recorded music throughout. Following the World War II, that is, Morse code machinery was adapted to create these sort of synthesizers that attach to a keyboard, and we got these additional instruments involved like electric keyboards. We're able to develop the vinyl, and this is where you push the sort of envelope of recorded music. And then some artists like Elvis Presley, they come out the woodwork, they're promoted really highly. Cliff Richard in the UK, the Beatles, and you have this overwhelming sort of rush in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and then 90s. At the complete height is the 90s, just before the internet. And then you have all this music being super, super important to pop culture. It's essentially an epitome of the international audience wanting music as part of their overall entertainment needs. Because remember, this is a time before Netflix, etc. So it's huge in this period. And as you go through, we can see that the cassette CD do fall, with the vinyl going to cassette because cassettes were portable and more easily to manage. But then CDs were just simpler, but also had a better sound quality than cassettes, and were also portable at the same time, which was one of the key reasons the vinyl fell out of popularity. And then the internet is essentially where you see CDs peak, and then piracy becomes a thing. And there's a big sort of issue there in terms of lost revenues on this sort of wild west of the internet. And this essentially leads to a scenario where there's a big lull in recorded music until not only the legal aspect of it catches up to the internet, but also streaming. Streaming and digital downloads were a little bit slow to the game by 4 or 5 years or so, and digital downloads became quite popular, but they had that piracy issue lingering around where you could purchase it and then share it to your friend, so you would really sort of harm your sales over the long term with just having files everywhere on the internet. By contrast, streaming and the proliferation of streaming has allowed for this piracy issue to become less important because there's less need. If you take away the need to essentially steal, then you don't really have it going on. And one of the things that streaming does is that it's widely accessible. It is a relatively affordable fee per month for the majority of people, and it allows people to go about listening to all their favorite music in one place. So overall, there's this big movement where you see a massive peak between the 60s and 90s. It tails off quite rapidly before 2010, and then streaming in the past 10 years has really pushed music back up a little bit. It's a bit of a resurgence. But notably, as we'll see later on, the recorded music industry in particular is on a bit of a decline still. So with all this in mind, what kind of models do music industry companies undertake? Well, there's physical media such as CDs and vinyls, you have streaming, live performance, and we have digital downloads. And then we have intellectual property and licensing, which is a focus on just having the rights to different sounds and tracks and stuff like that, and then licensing them out to third parties to use in their material, maybe an advert or a film, etc. So how do we apply all of this to our pre-scene? Well, Trevel was founded in the 80s, and this suggests that they're going to be coming in around the height of the music industry in particular, and the recorded music industry is moving into CDs at this point. So they're going to be very CD centric, and we did see that in the pre-scene. There was very limited mention of vinyls. They probably don't have any prior experience with vinyls, and that's likely a reason why there's not really a mention of vinyls. But we did get that very obvious hint that vinyls are on the up at the end of the pre-scene and the news reports. So with that in mind, Trevel may encounter some issues either strategically or culturally with modern trends, but we did see that they are emphasizing being innovative. So that's maybe less of a concern, but more of a concern is that lack of ability to hone into expertise in vinyls. They don't have that already. So the vinyl thing here is actually the modern trend that I would worry about in terms of Trevel, and it looks like Spandau Group when we compared them. Again, you may not have seen the pre-scene analysis videos, but if you have, we did do that comparison between the two, and we can sort of suggest that Spandau may have exploited physical media and the trend on vinyls more so than Trevel. Trevel don't seem to have done anything on that regard. And then we go to the business models. So essentially Trevel have all of these business models covered, though the vinyl aspect again is definitely going to be a notable exclusion from the pre-scene material, and there was an emphasis on live performances and licensing in the contextual elements of the pre-scene, but it wasn't Trevel specific. So actually, in this case, we see that Trevel may actually need to diversify into live performances, because whilst we have these advances that we're being paid to artists to get them to go to live performances and to promote their albums and stuff, Trevel are largely detached from that. They're just providing the money to do so if necessary. And in the news report section, we did get a very clear hint that live performances are on the up, recorded music's on the down, and it may be a good idea to cover the seasonal variants with some summer festivals organised and run by Trevel. So that could be an area of expansion in terms of business models. So this brings us to the final section, and we're only going to go over a couple here, but there's 25 for you to look through. They are sort of essentially little snippets of news and other articles and stuff that essentially will give you a good basis of knowledge to draw from for different issues. So let's take a look at just a couple. So the way we use those is essentially you have a topic. If it's relevant to that topic, you can utilize it as justification to your point. Make sure it is relevant. Don't just dump it. They hate that. You might even annoy your marker for doing so. So definitely do not just dump knowledge for no reason. Make sure it's relevant. Make sure it backs up your claims or supports whatever point you're trying to make. And we've got that with our example paragraphs in sort of a hypothetical aspect, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So the first one is that a no-deal Brexit may impact touring Europe for UK artists. So this is a pastel topic, a risk management topic, where if we were to branch out into live performances, the free movement of people is going to be really, really important. It makes it smoother, less time is taken to travel, and the tour dates can be done quite simply, but touring can become simply unviable after new government guidelines for cultural, heritage and sporting professionals touring Europe signalled a difficult future for DIY organisations. So essentially all these live performance companies that are actually doing the live performance concerts and stuff that Trevel are then paying the artist to go ahead with, Trevel should be aware of this becoming invalid because it could lead to significant issues with touring and thus harm revenues. Why is that? Well, revenues rely on marketing. A key way to market in music is to have these touring aspects with our artists. So recent research suggests that recent research on Brexit impacts suggests that the UK music industry will be harmed significantly due to the damage of live performances on tour. And essentially, the knock-on effect, which I probably should have added as an additional sentence, is that Trevel will be less able to market and promote their albums with this very direct and very popular method of promotion. So there is then a difficulty, and there you can lead into your pesto analysis and risk management approaches and stuff like that.
Hello, it's me again. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to first extend my hope that you enjoyed the free sample that you've just viewed, but also to just sort of explain what else a strategy do to help you pass your exam really effectively, provided you found our sample particularly interesting and insightful, of course. So, of course, we have a study text for every module, ranging from P1 to F3, and the certificate level is also free on our website. So we have study texts throughout the CIMA course, every module you could hope to study. The certificate level are free, as I mentioned, and then the rest of them, ranging from P1 to F3, are all available to purchase. Alongside this, if you're not so much a study text kind of student and you prefer a visual way of learning, we have the course videos. We essentially break down the study text into bite-sized presentations with a walkthrough, and it's a very, very, very engaging way of explaining the course. Following this, we have the pre-scene analysis, where we break down each pre-scene sitting into a number of videos, going through the whole document, but also adding a top 10 recommendations for what will come up in the exam, and also a strategic analysis where we put all the models you'd find in E2, for example, to the pre-scene itself, whichever that may be at the time. Alongside this, we provide an industry analysis. This is a document and accompanying video which help you give that contextual information in your exam. So, for example, if the pre-scene is on the oil industry, the industry analysis will break down the oil industry, the current topics, trends, issues, what the competitive market looks like, all those kind of aspects, all condensed into one so you can spend your time wisely in your study period. Following on from this, when you actually want to practice all this knowledge, we have mock exams for all of our materials. So StudyText has a generic mock exam based on the module, whereas the pre-scene analysis has mocks available to purchase that are based on that specific pre-scene, that are targeted to the key issues we believe will come up. And if you're not content with just doing those mock exams and practicing that way, we have a marking and feedback system where you can purchase the ability to send in your paper, have it marked by a CIMA qualified accountant, and get personalized feedback on whether you can improve X or Y area. And sort of finally, if you will, if you're feeling really underprepared and that exam is coming really, really soon, the master classes are offered by Astranti, and they're essentially a crash course in anything you could want for that topic. So if it's a master class on the pre-scene, it's going to give you absolutely everything that you could possibly need to know about the pre-scene in one really condensed sitting. Likewise, if it was the F3 masterclass, you would have all of F3 gone through in a very crash course style presentation and video link. You can also purchase it post-stream as opposed to viewing it live, all these kind of aspects. We are very, very confident that these materials will help you get the exam success that you want. So we have a pass guarantee. Provided you fill out a form which demonstrates that you have utilized our materials to a large extent and actually taken the time to study them, and you have unfortunately failed, we will offer you the same materials again for the next sitting as a consolidatory offer to ensure that you can get back on the horse and get that exam grade that you want. With that said, thank you very much for watching the sample video. I hope you enjoyed it and it gives you a lot of confidence in Astranti and your CIMA future.